Okay, we're going to get started. Good morning, everyone. My name is Vera Radu. I'm the supervisor of curriculum instruction and assessment for the Rumson School District. And with me is my esteemed colleague, Mrs. Jennifer Gibbons, the principal here at the wonderful Forrestdale School. We are happy that you're joining us today for this informative presentation. We are going to be recording it. So you just need to set that disclaimer out. But it's also for you to be able to view the presentation after we're done because you may have forgotten something, you may need something clarified. So it will be posted on our curriculum tab under screencasts and presentations, the video, by next week. All right, so that's the first housekeeping piece of information. The second piece is we'd like for everyone to remain on mute. We are going to be asking you to place all of your questions in the chat box. And periodically throughout the presentation, we're going to stop and Mrs. Gibbons or I will read those questions aloud and hopefully answer them to the best of our ability. Okay, so we're going to get started. This presentation, as you know, is about the process for ELA and math placement for our rising 6th, 7th, and 8th grade students. We can go to the next slide. Great. So what courses are leveled in those grades? Well, we have enriched ELA, and we also have accelerated math course pathways for our 6th, 7th, and 8th grade students. And our district has done a tremendous job over the past, I would say, 8 years, refining the rubrics, taking stakeholder input, meeting with the high school to be sure that our rubrics are solid and that we are advancing the correct students at the correct time. And based on all of the feedback that we've received, the refinement has done an excellent job at identifying those kids who are ready for such coursework. All right, so I'm going to talk about ELA because that's my wheelhouse. Mrs. Gibbons is going to talk a little bit about math because she's that kind of math nerd. Um, so enriched ELA. You need to know that the standards for enriched ELA are the same across the board. They are learning in 6th grade enriched ELA and in the 6th grade regular classroom, the same standards, okay? It does not lead to advanced coursework at the high school level if you are taking enriched ELA. And the course is quite difficult, the enriched ELA course. And we're going to talk a little bit about that and how you can best identify if your child might be ready for such work. So, there's an increased volume and complexity of reading and writing assignments in the enriched ELA class. The students are expected to read a wide variety of higher lexile texts. They delve into those texts, challenging their comprehension, their analytical skills. And the other piece of the enriched ELA class, not only is it that increased rigor in the reading, the writing assignments are higher level, they are more frequent. They're varied, doing research, a little bit of creative writing, literary analysis. Um, they work really on refining their writing style um, and organizing their ideas coherently. So it is a balanced scale. You've got that reading and writing piece and that increased rigor. So there are a few things that I'd like to talk about regarding how a student can be successful in an enriched ELA class. And on this slide, there are bulleted points, but I really want to have the conversation about the decision to have your child participate in an enriched ELA classroom if they qualify, or the decision to have them sit for appeal testing if they qualify for that. And we really want to take a holistic approach at looking at our students. We want to look at their academic abilities, which we will take care of in the rubric, their interest in reading, their readiness to thrive in such an environment. We really have to consider a variety of factors. Um, The expectations and demands in the enriched ELA program are uh, pretty rigorous, as we discussed on the previous slide. And considering your child's level of interest in reading, are they passionate about reading? Are they interested in a variety of texts? Do they enjoy talking about what they're reading? Do they enjoy writing assignments? Take a look at cross curricularly. How are they doing in science and social studies with those types of activities? Are they voracious? Or can you not get enough in your house in terms of books for them? Um, what about their work habits? Can they do things independently? Do they require a lot of structure or are they self starters? Those are really some of the most important characteristics that you can look for in your child to see if they are ready at this point for an enriched ELA course. And we also think it's equally important for you to have that discussion with your child and have that input what this rigorous course looks like and what you might be required to do, and balancing that with some of the things that our kids are doing outside of school. Um, I think that's a really important conversation to have with your child. And it is also important to know that simply because they may not qualify for enriched ELA during a current year, it doesn't mean that they can't move into it during that school year if the data and their work habits improve, or the following year. So it's not if you don't get in sixth grade, you don't get in ever. Mrs. Gibbons and I, meet with our ELA and math teachers frequently to talk about each student's performance to see if they're demonstrating a readiness for that acceleration or enrichment. Okay, so we talked about the course, we talked about the characteristics of a successful student. Let's talk a little bit about how we look at your child's academic profile to determine whether or not they're showing readiness in that area. So we use several pieces of criteria, and for those parents who have children who are in seventh or eighth grade, you may be aware of all of these. We use indicators such as growth measure, Achieve 3000, the end of year spring benchmark scores for that. We also look at NJSLA. All of our students in 5, 6, and 7 will take an end of course assessment that we use formatively and as an indicator on our rubric to determine if a student is ready. That assessment is given at the end of May. We take a look at all of those data points, and based on how a student is scoring, they either qualify automatically for enriched ELA, or if they meet certain indicators, they'll qualify for appeal. So I'd like to pull up for you now the placement rubric for 5 into 6 enriched ELA. Okay, as you see on this slide, there are several pieces of information that we take a look at for enriched ELA. Those indicators are on the left-hand column. Okay, so we're looking at growth measure, a certain lexile. We're looking at Achieve 3000, a particular lexile. We are looking at NJSLA ELA score from the previous year, or if a student scores a 90 or higher on the end of course assessment. And we are also looking at that end of course writing piece for your child. So all of those criteria are listed there. You have access to all of this information on the Genesis Parent Portal, so you'll be able to plug in those scores into this worksheet and follow along to see if your child qualifies. If your child does not qualify for enriched ELA automatically using the top portion of this rubric, the bottom portion, the gray portion, identifies the criteria by which your child would need to achieve in order to be able to sit for the appeal test. This means they didn't get in automatically, but they've met enough of the criteria for them to be able to sit. And let's make sure, let's give them a second look to make sure that we've gotten it right. Okay. Can we go to the next rubric? 6 into 7 and 7 into 8. Okay. The 6 into 7, 7 into 8 is very similar. The only portion that is different is that if students are currently in enriched ELA, they need to score a mandatory uh, final grade average, which is indicated on the first line, in order to remain in that course sequence in the subsequent year. If current accelerated students don't meet that end of course grade final average, then there are criteria by which we can take another look. Okay, so they didn't get the average in the course that we needed to automatically advance. Well, let's take a look at some mandatory criteria. Did they meet this? Did they meet this? And if they met those mandatory criteria without having that final grade average, then they advance. For students who are not in enriched ELA yet in sixth grade or seventh grade, we do offer an opportunity for those students to appeal into enriched ELA, and that criteria is listed for you right on the sheet. They would need to score a mandatory score on the appeal test in order then to advance into enriched ELA. That's a lot of information. I'm going to pause and give Ms. Gibbons an opportunity to talk about some of the questions.
Yeah, I have one question in the chat so far. It seems as though our rubric is based upon test data versus classroom success. Is there an opportunity for classroom success to be a part of this consideration outside of the end of course assessment?
Absolutely. So what we do is Mrs. Gibbons and I meet with every teacher in fifth grade, sixth grade, and seventh grade. We talk about every student individually, and those meetings actually are coming up within the next month and a half or so. And we talk about student data and is it reflective of what you're seeing in the classroom? Was this a blip? So we do have opportunities for teachers to provide that classroom performance information. And then, as a placement team, we have a conversation with you. If the data is not supporting a student moving, but the teacher is feeling, let's take a deeper look, we have a conversation with you. Do we want to do the appeal test? So yes, we do take teacher input. Anything else?
I think you can move on at this point.
Okay, great. All right. So we talked a little bit about how the placements are determined. We're going to go into options if you're not in agreement with the placement. We talked a little bit about how a student qualifies to appeal into the course. They need to meet the mandatory criteria listed on this slide that we talked about. We'll go to the next slide. And we're going to turn it over to math. Mrs. Gibbons, you're on.
Good morning. I just kind of want to talk with a little historical context. In the state of New Jersey, we typically see students in their freshman year of high school taking Algebra 1. Algebra 1 is a high school graduation requirement in regards to students achieving a passing score on the state NJSLA. So I just want to start with that information in regards to other high schools in New Jersey, because as we go through these slides, you're going to see when we start to introduce higher level courses in middle school, what level of performance and skills students are asking to apply, which is maybe in line with what high school 14 and 15-year-olds are taking. So I did feel like that's always important to say, because we also do recognize, in conjunction with our collaboration with RFH, that we have students with a proclivity for math who do need to be in accelerated course pathways. So I just sort of want to start with that to give you a little contextual information related to what typical high schools look like across New Jersey. Considering accelerated math is certainly something that we talk about a lot with parents in district and our math department and our teachers. We start this process in fifth grade in regards to aggregating students related to data and readiness to move into that accelerated course pathways, which I'll show you a scope and sequence in a bit. What I do have to say is, as of ripe age of a fifth grader, we're starting to ask these questions about whether or not a student shows a passion for math, whether or not a student is a complex problem solver and can take an algorithm that's learned in the classroom and apply it in a real world situation, if they have an analytical mindset related to approaching new problems, and then whether or not they have the tenacity to engage in productive struggle. And that is sometimes where our students struggle at first. Oftentimes, math comes easy for students through elementary school. And then when we talk about acceleration, we want to really make sure the students that we put in our accelerated pathway are able to not just meet with success in rote algorithm application, but also in that complex problem solving. So, with that being said, when we're considering accelerated math, we look for exemplary work habits in the classroom as well as at home, the ability to problem solve independently and ask questions as appropriate, and as well as the ability to move at a rigorous pace that allows for curriculum compacting. And I'll talk about that a little bit more in depth when we move on to the course scope and sequence, because you will see how our math department really condenses the standards in order to, within one school year, in order to meet all of the benchmarks that need to be met in order to meet with success within that curriculum. So Mrs. Wargo, I think I've spoken through the next slide as well. So you can move on to the pathways for math. Thank you. As we mentioned, we start this process in fifth grade, having conversations with teachers. We've already begun conversations around the November conference time with teachers and parents, moving into now this mid-year check-in with our teachers, as well as at the end of the year when we're making the final placement decisions. So for a lot of you who have rising sixth graders, there are 3 different courses that students can be placed into for math, moving from grade 5 to grade 6. There is the general grade 6 math class, which covers the grade 6 math standards. There is a 6th grade accelerated math class, which covers our grade 6 standards and the half of grade 7 math standards. Those students are showing that they're ready for about 1 grade level acceleration. And those students, when successful, are on a trajectory to take Algebra 1 as 8th graders. So that 9th grade class as an 8th grader. And then lastly, we have our pre-algebra students, which is a cohort of students who have met criteria to successfully complete 3 levels of math in grade 6 and a little summer course. So essentially what happens is these students are working through the curriculum for the New Jersey Learning Standards in grade 6, in grade 7, and grade 8. The trajectory for those students after successful completion of the course and our summer class is to move into Algebra 1, which is again that high school 9th grade course, as 7th graders, and then taking 10th grade geometry as 8th graders. So we can move on to the next slide and you can see that progression that I just sort of described here. So the top level of course scope and sequence is what a traditional student will take in middle school. Grade 6 general math, leading to grade 7 general math, reading to grade 8 general math, with high school Algebra 1 in grade 9. The second tier you will see is moving into that grade 6 accelerated class, moving through 7th grade pre-algebra, and then 8th grade Algebra 1, moving into 9th grade geometry or geometry honors. And then lastly, the pre-algebra students moving into 7th grade Algebra 1 and geometry as 8th graders, moving into with successful completion and meeting all standards. That would mean as a freshman, they are taking Algebra 2.
Mrs. Gibbons,
Yes.
could you explain what the blue dotted arrows mean?
Absolutely. So when I move on to the rubric, I was going to talk about sort of not being locked into one course pathway, but now's a perfect time with the visual cue to bring that up. When we make placement decisions in grade 5, we do not lock a student into one of these set pathways. Every single year, there are students that teachers work with within the context of the class who show readiness and show desire to keep progressing and growing at a level that could move them into a different accelerated course pathway at any point. So we have had students that move in at a mid-year point, but we also have students that move in at the conclusion of a school year. So a concrete example may be a student in grade 6 math does not meet our criteria, does not show readiness quite yet at the start of 6th grade, but works on some enrichment exercises, shows great growth with our benchmark assessments, is showing that propensity for wanting to explore math at a more complex level. And we build in safeguards for the teacher to work with that child, and then even providing summer coursework to catch that child up to maybe make the leap from grade 6 math to that grade 7 pre-algebra class. So that's an important piece to understand. We've had students as well move from a 6th grade accelerated class into the grade 7 algebra class the following year with that summer course built in to help them ensure that they have the prerequisite mastery to meet with success. We have students in grade 7 likewise move across the bar into those different course pathways and before they move into 8th grade as well. I hope that answered the question, Mrs. Rudu.
Yes.
So much like my ELA, we have met with our math department as well as our high school, and this has probably been an 8-year process where we look and reflect every single year with our data team on how we're doing. Are we getting it right? Are we accelerating the right students based upon the data we have? And what data might we need to reflect upon in regards to making sure we scoop up the correct kids to meet with success? The last thing we want to do as a middle school is push a child too soon and have them feel defeated in a math class and have them lose that passion for math. Likewise, we want to make sure we're catching those kids who have a passion for math and need the acceleration. So with that being said, the criteria that we look at throughout the year is based upon our multiple measures and indicators, which are our, this year, growth measure, our NJSLA, and our end of course assessment. And then if you move on, Mrs. Wargo, to the specific rubrics, we can post those. Mrs. Wargo, are you able to post the math rubric for 5 to 6 next? Thank you so much. So you'll see here, this is our rubric. And again, it's in a workshop format, so a worksheet format, so you can kind of walk through it. But we have the different criteria moving from grade 5 to 6 for the various levels of courses. The first being grade 6 accelerated. And again, we're looking at NJSLA performance in 5th grade. We're looking at end of grade 5 course assessments. We're also looking at end of grade 4 NJSLA, as well as our quantile score, which is given to us through our growth measure benchmark assessment. And then for pre-algebra, you'll see that criteria slightly increases because the rigor increases. And again, we're covering 3 years of math in 1 year plus a little summer course. And we're again looking at those performance levels on NJSLA from grade 4 and 5, the end of course benchmark assessment, classroom assessment, and then of course our spring quantile scores. Likewise, there is an appeal process that we really speak a long time with our teachers about, making sure that we're getting all the kids that we want to get into the correct classes. And the appeal process is one such as Mrs. Radu described, where we get one more piece of data, making sure we're getting it right for that child. And we're looking at students who maybe don't meet all of the criteria, but have at least one of those indicators that they've met. And we want to make sure that we see where they are performing at. So our goal is to try, with much of what we've seen over the years, is that our students perform better on the appeal test when we embed it into the school year. So in previous years, we had looked at some summer testing, and as we all know, sometimes we have more of a beach mind, or we're further away from our math or school brain. And last year, we piloted moving the appeal tests to June within the context of the school day. And the students performed really well on those. They were in school mode. They were with familiar adults in the building. They were still coming in with the mindset that they weren't quite yet on summer vacation. And that is something the math department and ELA department felt was like was a really good fit in regards to getting better data. So that's something we're going to continue with this year. And then lastly, we can move on to the 6th to 7th and 7th to 8th grade rubric with the maintenance of being in an accelerated course path based upon how a student is performing in that class currently, moving them along, but as well as the idea of not being stuck in a course pathway, us examining how a student is doing in their existing course and whether or not they're showing readiness at this point to move on. Oftentimes, those types of students maybe had challenges with some executive functioning, organization, independent work, problem solving without asking rote questions in grade 6, but with a little maturity and enrichment opportunities with their 6th grade teacher. We're seeing that they're ready to make that jump in 7th grade and then potentially in 8th grade as well. So you'll see that rubric on the website as well. Exists for us to have an appeal process in place to make sure that we scoop up those children into the right course pathways as well. Moving on to the next slide, sort of makes a little bit more, thanks, Mrs. Wargo. It makes it more apparent there. It kind of shows you the snippet of what exactly we're looking at, which is, again, those quantile scores, performances on NJSLA, the classroom assessment for the end of course. And then, again, if they qualify for appeal, we're making sure we do that while they're still in their school mode during June here at school. I'm going to take a pause there for Mrs. Radu to pop in with any questions that are on the chat.
Sure. The first question is related to the summer extension course for the grade 6 pre-algebra students.
Sure. So
they just want to know when it is.
Okay. Yeah. So that course is after grade 6, and it is the summer between 6th and 7th grade. It is about a 6-week program. I know a lot of students have obligations related to camps and family vacations, and we provide flexibility within that in regards to providing independent work as well as office hour check-ins with the teacher who's running the course to ensure that the students that are in pre-algebra have access to a teacher as well as move along within the standards that are necessary to complete prior to starting algebra as a 7th grader. I hope that answered those questions.
It does, yep. So, the timing, it's a virtual course. It's typically Tuesdays and Thursdays that students are a part of that course. And just a side note, the teacher who teaches the course tends to be the teacher who they've had during the school year. And she reviews that summer curriculum because each class is different. They progress at different rates, and she may change up her curriculum based on that information. The next question, Mrs. Gibbons, relates to pathways for freshmen to take geometry. If they've been in 6th grade, 7th grade, 8th grade math, and have not shown that readiness, they've appealed and have not shown that readiness, what does the high school offer?
Absolutely. So a couple of items I'll highlight about the high school. We're going through this process with our 8th graders right now in regards to placement. So our students that are in algebra right now as an 8th grader need to qualify for either geometry or honors geometry. The criterion the high school is using for placement into honors is that the students have maintained a 93 or higher in trimester 1 on all of their assessments. So that would be quizzes and tests, as well as the student had received a 5 in algebra during their 7th grade year, that they received a 5 on the grade 7 pre-algebra NJSLA. And then lastly, there is a rubric that the high school asks the teachers to complete that will help determine the habits of mind, the executive functioning skills of that student related to being placed into either geometry or honors geometry. So that would be for my 8th graders that are taking Algebra 1. For my 8th graders taking geometry, the rubric is very similar and the criterion is very similar for students to move into the Algebra 2 honors program as 9th graders, the 93 or higher on assessments, the 5 on their algebra and JSLA as 7th graders, and then lastly, the rubric with the teacher input related to mathematical practices, habits of mind, and executive functioning skills. For my students who are current 8th graders, which means they're in a pre-algebra curriculum. The high school builds in a safeguard at sophomore year for students to double up in taking math so that they are able to complete calculus before they graduate. They won't do that freshman year in regards to the workload for the students. However, they will do it sophomore year because it makes mathematical sense for you to take Algebra 1 as a ninth grader and then as a 10th grader, take geometry and Algebra 2. So, again, some of my students currently who are in eighth grade math are having those conversations with the high school counselors next month when they're meeting about their schedule so that they know they make a special mark on their schedule that moving from freshman to sophomore year, that is a desire.
Great. The next question I can probably answer regarding the hours for the summer commitment for the pre-algebra, grade 6 pre-algebra. Typically, I said it's Tuesdays and Thursdays from 12 until 2 on Tuesday. The structure is about from 12 to 1, it's whole group, and then 1 till 2, it's small group work, individual work. Thursdays is again 12 to 2, and the teacher is meeting whole group, small group, individually with students, and providing kind of that office hour as well if a student is struggling or has further questions that they'd like to meet with the teacher one-on-one. In terms of it being a virtual format, we have been carefully taking a look at how our students in that summer course perform once they move to grade 7 algebra, and it has been received wonderfully by the math teacher in 7th grade. The kids are prepared and they are ready for that curriculum once they get there. We've had great success with the virtual format. Okay, we can move to the next slide. Okay, so how will you know your child's placement, and how will you know if your child can appeal? Around June 1st, letters will be mailed home via snail mail for students, and these letters will contain all the information you need about the process that we just talked about and where your student is going to place for next year. There will be a chart, just like the one you see here on the screen. The subject, math and ELA, is listed. Placement, it will show you what course they have placed into based on our rubrics, and their appeal status. Do they qualify for appeal? It will either say yes, they do, or it will say no, they don't. Okay? So that'll be very clearly stated on your letter. All right, we can move to the next slide. Okay. Super important to understand that if your child qualifies for appeal testing, we are only hosting it at the end of the school year, and the dates are listed on this one slide right here. As Mrs. Gibbons talked about, we piloted it last year. It was met with great enthusiasm by all of the teachers. They felt the kids were in the right mindset. They were with familiar people in a familiar setting. So testing will be hosted on June 10th and 11th of the school year here. So it's going to be clearly indicated, as we said. In order for your child to sit for appeal testing, first they have to meet the criteria. And second, you're going to need to go into the Genesis parent portal and fill in the math or the ELA appeal testing form. Only students who qualify for appeal will have that form in the parent portal. So if you don't see the form, that's another way for you to know if your child is qualifying for appeal. Okay. Again, June 10th and 11th, appeal testing is hosted. Those results will be mailed home sometime in July. And any parent who has remaining questions after receiving that final placement letter in July, information will be sent home about if you have further questions and you'd like to speak with Mrs. Gibbons and you'd like to speak with me. We've set aside 2 dates during the summer by which we will host those phone calls. The dates are listed there, July 18th and the 25th. And that will all be in the letter process for how you can secure some time with us on the phone. We'll be there for you. This slide just kind of gives you that visual for the timeline. The last circle there relates to NJSLA. We talked a little bit about how we identify kids for acceleration for next year using the data that we have. Okay, so we use NJSLA data from last year. Okay, but our NJSLA data for this school year that their students are going to be taking in the spring of this school year isn't available to us. Okay, so what we do once the New Jersey Department of Education releases those scores to us sometime late June or July, they release it to us just for placement purposes. It's not released to parents yet, it's still embargoed. We take a second look to make sure that we've given every student the opportunity to sit for appeal testing if they've received the 5 on their NJSLA. So the initial process is very good at capturing those kids. Last year, we had maybe 5 kids who did really well on NJSLA, scored that 5, and were then able to appeal. And we do accommodate for that. So I just wanted to make sure that you knew that we're constantly looking at fresh data coming in. Okay. All right. Let's see.
Okay, I have a couple questions.
Yep.
There's little confusion. The NJSLA scores we use is from the end of fourth grade.
So, yes, initially it is. Okay. So, if a student received a 5 on NJSLA in grade 4 in either ELA or math, that would meet one of those two criteria in fifth grade, either a 5 or that 90 on the end of course assessment, if you go back to the rubric. Sometimes we don't even need to look at the NJSLA score because the student achieves the 90 on the end of course assessment. So, they meet that criteria. Typically, students who are achieving 5s continue to achieve 5s throughout their schooling. So that's why we also consider the previous year's NJSLA. So I don't know if we can go back to that slide
The,
so we can kind of
the other thing
demonstrate
I
that.
want to just add to what Mrs. Radu said is initially in June, when we're making these placement decisions, we don't yet have the new NJSLA scores. So we're using last year's score as a guide. And then what happens is we look at the NJSLA scores when we get them after that June 1st. I don't think we've gotten them before June 1st in the last 16 years. So I'm quite sure that it's always after that. We get those in, and then we see, hey, was there anybody who only had a 4 maybe last year, but now they did get a 5? So now they actually are meeting that first bullet point on the criteria. Let's make sure we scoop them in. Yeah, because we didn't have them initially on our list. I hope that clarifies.
Right. And this slide kind of demonstrates you're either scoring that 5 on NJSLA or you're scoring the mandatory score in the end of course assessment. So it's one of those two pieces of data that you would need in order to sit for appeal testing. Um, I think that's it. Any other questions in the chat? I don't see.
I don't know.
No. Okay, so with that, we're going to end our meet. Again, this recording will be posted next week on the curriculum website. We want to thank you for being active participants. We are always here to answer any questions you might have. Reach out via email. We're happy to help you better understand if there's any remaining things that you wanted to ask offline. Okay, I wish everyone a wonderful day and thanks again.